At TSA screening, she was pulled aside. No paperwork, no standard harness, and her dog had no visible ID tag. Officers assumed it was fake, refused boarding, and called in a supervisor. She didn't argue, but when one agent checked the inside of the dog's left ear, he froze. Inked inside was a military alphanumeric tattoo, K93RDSFG, the ID format used for Special Forces K9 units. Protocol changed instantly. The supervisor made a call, used a code word, and quietly waved her through. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigued you, consider subscribing for more untold stories of extraordinary people living among us. The fluorescent lights of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport cast harsh shadows across the morning rush of travelers. The terminal buzzed with activity as passengers hurried toward their gates, dragging luggage and checking boarding passes with blurry eyes. Among them moved Talia Valero, a woman whose efficient stride and vigilant gaze betrayed a lifetime of training she was trying to conceal beneath civilian clothes. Talia wore dark jeans and a simple navy jacket that hung just loose enough to allow for quick movement. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and though she appeared relaxed to casual observers, her eyes never stopped scanning the environment. She moved with purpose, navigating the crowd with minimal contact, always maintaining awareness of exits and security positions. Beside her walked Corvus, a Belgian Malinois, whose disciplined demeanor set him apart from typical service animals. No vest adorned his muscular frame. No patches identified his status. No documentation was prominently displayed, just a standard black lead and the absolute focus of an animal with purpose. His ears stood alert, and despite the chaos of the terminal, his attention remained fixed forward, perfectly in step with Talia. They approached the security checkpoint where lines of passengers removed shoes and electronics, placing them in gray bins. Talia had timed their arrival precisely, not too early to draw attention by waiting, not too late to create unnecessary pressure. She selected a line with a mix of business travelers, choosing the middle path that offered the best chance of blending in. "Boarding pass and ID, please," said the first TSA agent, barely looking up from his podium. Talia produced both with smooth efficiency. The agent glanced at her photo, then at her face, then back at the ID before waving her forward. She moved to place her single carry-on bag on the conveyor belt, removing a laptop and placing it in a separate bin as required. "Ma'am, you need to stop there," called Officer Briggs, a stocky TSA agent whose morning had already been too long. "Animals require proper documentation for screening." Talia paused, her expression neutral as travelers continued streaming past, some already glancing with irritation at another security delay. Corvus remained perfectly still beside her, not reacting to the commotion around them. "I have his basic information here," she said, producing a minimalist folder from her jacket pocket with just enough paperwork to pass cursory inspection. Her voice carried neither anxiety nor challenge, just factual confidence. Briggs flipped through the sparse documents with increasing skepticism. "This is not sufficient for a service animal," he said, voice rising slightly for the benefit of his colleagues. "Where is his certification?" "Health records, service animal identification." A small crowd had begun to form around them, some genuinely concerned, others merely curious, and a few filming with phones partially concealed. Corvus remained perfectly still, beside Talia, eyes forward, unnaturally calm amid the growing tension. "This documentation has been sufficient at other security checkpoints," Talia stated, not defensively, but as a simple fact. She maintained steady eye contact with Briggs, who seemed increasingly determined to assert his authority. "Well, it is not sufficient here," he replied firmly. "All service animals require proper identification and documentation confirming their training and purpose." A woman in line behind them huffed audibly. "Some of us have connections to make," she said, checking her watch with dramatic emphasis. "Can this wait?" "The problem," Briggs announced loudly, turning to address the growing audience, "is another fake service animal without proper documentation. This happens all the time. People trying to bring pets on board by claiming they are service animals." Talia checked her watch, a subtle motion that revealed a faded scar tracing up her wrist before disappearing beneath her sleeve. Her flight would begin boarding in 15 minutes. She hadn't anticipated this particular delay in her carefully constructed timeline. "I understand your concern," she said, voice still measured. "I would like to speak with a supervisor, please." "Already called one," Briggs replied with evident satisfaction. "Until then, you and the dog need to step aside so others can proceed through security." As Talia moved to the designated waiting area, she noticed a businessman in the security line watching her with unusual interest. Something about her bearing had caught his attention. The way she scanned exits, positioned herself with clear sight lines, kept Corvus always on her left. Small details most civilians would never notice. More passengers moved through the checkpoint, many casting curious or irritated glances toward Talia and Corvus. A young man with stylish glasses had begun not so subtly recording the scene on his phone. Talia shifted her position slightly, turning her face away from his camera without making it obvious she had noticed. Agent Keller arrived 5 minutes later, moving with the swaggering confidence of someone accustomed to enforcing rules without question. He was taller than Briggs with a pressed uniform and close-cropped hair that suggested former military service, though his bearing lacked the precision Talia recognized in actual veterans. "Documentation issue with a service animal?" he asked Briggs while looking Talia over with practiced condescension. "She is claiming it is a service dog." Briggs emphasized the word claiming with obvious skepticism. "No proper identification, no service vest, minimal paperwork. Says she has flown with it before." Keller turned his full attention to Talia. "Ma'am, we have specific protocols for service animals. Without proper documentation, your dog cannot proceed through the checkpoint." "I understand," Talia replied, her calm unchanged. "However, under certain circumstances." "Everyone has circumstances," Keller interrupted, holding up his hand. "And everyone needs to follow the same rules. If exceptions were made, security would become meaningless." More travelers had paused to watch. Now, the young man with glasses was definitely live streaming the confrontation, narrating in hushed tones about entitled people with fake service animals trying to game the system. Talia noted his position, but gave no indication she could hear him. "I would like to request a private screening," Talia said, keeping her voice low enough that the audience would need to strain to hear. "So, you can delay us further?" Keller scoffed. "That is not happening. Either produce valid documentation or you will both need to exit the security area." Talia checked her watch again, 12 minutes until boarding. Her window was narrowing, but she maintained her composed exterior. Corvus, sensing the subtle shift in her energy, remained perfectly still, eyes forward, training overriding any natural canine instinct to react to the tense environment. "Is there no accommodation that can be made?" she asked, still without raising her voice or showing frustration. "No," Keller stated flatly. "Rules exist for a reason. We cannot allow undocumented animals through security. It creates precedent and compromises our protocols." The businessman who had been observing the situation stepped out of his place in the security line, approaching the group with purposeful strides. As he drew closer, Talia noted the way he carried himself. Shoulders back, movements economical, eyes alert. Military, she assessed immediately. Probably officer rank based on his confidence in approaching security personnel. "Excuse me," he said, revealing a resonant voice accustomed to command. "Lieutenant Ambrose, currently on leave. May I offer some assistance in this situation?" Keller frowned, territorial instinct evident in his posture. "This is a TSA matter, sir. We appreciate your service, but we have protocols to follow." "Of course," Ambrose replied smoothly. "I completely understand. I only wondered if you have checked for a microchip or other identification. Military working dogs sometimes have alternative documentation methods that might not be immediately apparent." "This is not a military dog," Keller said dismissively. "It is another case of someone trying to bring their pet on board by claiming it is a service animal. We see it every day." "Nevertheless," Ambrose persisted, "it might save everyone time to check. The dog shows remarkable discipline." A final boarding call echoed through the terminal for another flight. Talia's expression remained unchanged, but her eyes flicked briefly toward the departure boards. Her timeline was compressing dangerously. Officer Reynolds, who had been observing from nearby, moved closer to the group. "What is going on here?" "Another emotional support animal case," Briggs explained with evident frustration. "No documentation, no service vest, nothing. Reynolds studied Corvus with more professional interest than his colleagues had shown. That is a Belgian Malinois, right? Not your typical emotional support breed. Yes, Talia answered simply. Expensive choice for a pet, Reynolds commented, noting the dog's muscular build and alert posture. Usually see these in police work or military service. The mention of military service caused Keller to glance at Lieutenant Ambrose, who maintained neutral but attentive observation of the scene. Fine. Keller finally relented, more to demonstrate his authority than from genuine consideration. Reynolds, check for a chip or tag. Then we are escorting them out if nothing is found. Reynolds knelt beside Corvus, who remained perfectly still, eyes forward. Mind if I check him? He asked Talia, showing more professional courtesy than his colleagues. Go ahead, Talia replied. Reynolds gently examined the dog, running practiced hands over his neck and shoulders, checking for hidden tags or identifiers. Finding nothing immediately obvious, he reached toward Corvus's head. Let me check his ears. Sometimes identification is tattooed there. As Reynolds carefully tilted Corvus's left ear, his expression suddenly changed. His body went still, and for a moment, he said nothing at all. Inside the ear, inked in permanent military style, was a tattoo K93RDSFG, followed by a series of classified markers that only those with specific clearance would recognize. Reynolds stared at it, then looked up at Talia with new understanding dawning in his eyes. The change in Reynolds was immediate and profound. His posture straightened, his expression shifted from casual suspicion to recognition, and a new tension filled his frame. He looked up at Talia with entirely different eyes, seeing now what had been carefully concealed beneath civilian clothing and minimal documentation. Sir, he said quietly to Keller, his tone completely altered. You need to see this. Keller frowned, but leaned down, examining the tattoo inside Corvus's ear, his entire demeanor transformed in an instant. The swagger drained away, replaced by something approaching professional respect. He straightened up and looked at Talia again, this time seeing what he had missed before. The subtle indicators of someone who had served in elite units. Is there a problem, officers? Talia asked, her voice carrying a different weight now, though she had not changed her tone or stance. Lieutenant Ambrose caught Keller's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod of confirmation. The alphanumeric code in the dog's ear told a story that only certain personnel would understand. This was no ordinary service animal, and Talia Valero was no ordinary traveler. No problem at all, Keller said, his tone completely altered. Give me one moment, please. He stepped away from the group, pulling out a secure phone and speaking in hushed tones, using phrases that included specific code words. Around them, other TSA agents had begun subtly redirecting the flow of travelers away from their position, creating an unobtrusive buffer zone. The young man who had been live streaming found his view suddenly blocked by security personnel who positioned themselves strategically between him and the scene. Hey, what is going on? Sir, we need this area clear. A newly arrived agent informed him firmly. Please continue to your gate or return to the security line. Reynolds remained kneeling beside Corvus, his hand still gently holding the dog's ear as if frozen in the moment of discovery. Third group, he murmured almost to himself, recognizing the unit designation in the tattoo. You served? Talia asked quietly. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Support role, not special forces, Reynolds replied, carefully releasing Corvus's ear end. Standing. But I worked with K9 units occasionally. Never saw one like this up close. The businessman, Lieutenant Ambrose, maintained his position nearby, his presence now serving as a buffer between Talia and curious onlookers. His military bearing had become more pronounced, as if in the presence of someone he recognized as a fellow operator. They will have you on your way shortly, he said in a low voice, for Talia's ears only. Apologies for the delay. Operational hazard. Talia replied with the faintest hint of a professional smile. Appreciate the assist. A final boarding call for another flight echoed through the terminal. Talia checked her watch again. 8 minutes until her own flight would begin boarding. The timeline remained workable, if tight. Officer Briggs, who had been watching the exchange with growing confusion, approached Keller as he returned from his phone call. What is going on? Are we clearing them or not? They are cleared, Keller stated definitively. In fact, we will be providing an escort to the gate. Based on what? Briggs demanded, still not understanding the sudden shift. A tattoo in the dog's ear. What does that even mean? It means, Reynolds interjected quietly, that we are dealing with matters above our pay grade. Let it go, Briggs. Around them, the security checkpoint had resumed normal operation, but with a subtle difference. The flow of travelers was being managed to create space around Talia and Corvus, with agents diverting attention away from them while maintaining the appearance of routine procedure. A plainclothes security officer approached, nodding respectfully to Talia. Captain Valero, we have cleared your path to the gate. If you would follow me, please. The use of her rank, spoken just loudly enough for those immediately present to hear, completed the transformation of the scene. Briggs stepped back, his earlier confidence deflated by the revelation that the woman he had been detaining was military personnel of significant rank. Captain, he repeated, looking at Talia with new eyes. I was not informed we had military transport today. That is rather the point, Officer Briggs, Lieutenant Ambrose said quietly. Some operations require discretion. Talia gave a slight nod to Reynolds, the only acknowledgement of his role in recognizing the significance of the tattoo. Thank you for your assistance, she said, her words simple but carrying genuine appreciation. Ma'am, Reynolds replied with newfound respect. Safe travels. As Talia and Corvus prepared to follow the plane officer, Keller stepped forward one last time. Captain Valero, he said, his voice carefully modulated. My apologies for the delay. Had we been properly informed, no information was necessary. Talia interrupted, not unkindly. You were doing your job. Security protocols exist for good reasons. The irony of her using his own earlier words was not lost on Keller, who nodded with appropriate humility. Nevertheless, we regret any inconvenience. The crowd that had gathered now found themselves gently but firmly dispersed by additional security personnel who had appeared with remarkable efficiency. The young man with the phone had already been escorted well away from the scene, his live stream terminated by the strategic positioning of officers who blocked his view without ever directly confronting him. Lieutenant Ambrose remained nearby, offering a subtle nod of recognition to Talia as she prepared to depart. Third group, he said quietly. I worked with some of your colleagues in Helmand Province. Good people. The best, Talia agreed simply. If you need anything while transiting, Ambrose offered, I will be on Concourse for the next 3 hours. Appreciated, Lieutenant, Talia replied. But I believe we are well in hand now. As Talia and Corvus were escorted toward the gate, the atmosphere around them had transformed entirely. The same security personnel who had questioned her authority now moved with deference, creating an unobtrusive corridor through the terminal. Regular travelers took little notice, assuming perhaps that they were witnessing the transit of a minor diplomat or security official. Corvus maintained his disciplined heel position, his military bearing now making perfect sense to those who had seen the tattoo. His movements matched Talia's exactly, the two of them operating as a single unit with practiced precision. They passed shops and restaurants filled with ordinary travelers concerned with mundane details, overpriced coffees, delayed connections, forgotten chargers. None would guess that among them moved operators whose mission parameters and destinations would never appear on any public flight information display. Talia maintained her civilian appearance, careful not to walk with too military a bearing now that her cover had been partially compromised. The key to blending in was not to overcorrect. She allowed her shoulders to relax slightly, adjusted her pace to match the casual flow of terminal traffic, and kept her vigilance measured rather than obvious. At the gate, the attendant had already been briefed by someone well above her pay grade. Her eyes widened slightly when Talia approached, but she maintained professional composure. We are ready for you, Captain, she said quietly. We will be boarding you first before our first-class passengers. That is not necessary, Talia replied. Standard boarding is fine. Better actually. The gate attendant nodded, understanding immediately. Of course. Then we will proceed with our normal boarding process. You are in seat 23B, middle of the aircraft. Will your companion need any accommodation? He will fit under the seat in front of me, Talia assured her. He is trained for confined spaces. As they waited for boarding to begin, Talia took a seat in the gate area, positioning herself with a clear view of approaching passengers. Corvus settled at her feet, alert, but appearing relaxed to casual observers. His training allowed him to rest while maintaining operational readiness, a skill that had saved their lives more than once in less controlled environments than an airport terminal. A brief flash crossed Talia's mind. Corvus alerting to explosives in an abandoned building outside Kandahar. The two of them extracting 3 hostages while under fire. Training sessions where they had worked until both were exhausted to perfect their communication under stress. The tattoo in his ear represented years of shared experience in environments few civilians could imagine. The gate attendant announced boarding for passengers needing extra assistance, followed by first class. Talia remained seated, watching as travelers gathered their belongings and formed a line. Lieutenant Ambrose appeared at the periphery of the gate area, having apparently altered his own travel plans to ensure Talia's departure proceeded without further incident. He maintained a discreet distance, his presence a professional courtesy rather than interference. When Group 3 was called for boarding, Talia rose and took her place in line. Corvus perfectly positioned beside her, they moved forward with the crowd, nothing in their demeanor now attracting special attention. As she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, Talia noted a subtle change in the security posture around the jetway. Additional personnel positioned casually but strategically, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Someone had taken her presence on this flight very seriously once her identity had been confirmed. "Have a good flight, ma'am," the gate agent said, scanning her boarding pass with professional efficiency. "Thank you," Talia replied simply. As they moved down the jetway, Talia felt the familiar transition taking place within her. The shift from public space where threats were theoretical to the confined environment of an aircraft where tactical options would be severely limited. Corvus sensed the change in her, his own alertness increasing subtly as they prepared to enter the more constrained space. Aboard the aircraft, Talia noted each face as she moved down the aisle, an automatic security assessment she had performed countless times. Most passengers were absorbed in their devices or settling into their seats, paying little attention to another traveler with a dog. As they passed row 14, Talia noticed a man in seat 14C make brief eye contact, a moment of recognition that would be imperceptible to anyone not trained to look for it. Another operative already in position. The mission parameters were unfolding as planned despite the minor delay at security. Talia found her seat and settled in, ensuring Corvus had adequate space under the seat in front of her. He arranged himself with practiced efficiency, his body compressed, but his senses still fully engaged. To other passengers, he appeared to be merely a well-behaved service dog. Only Talia knew he was scanning the aircraft for threats, his training, allowing him to identify danger signals imperceptible to humans. As the remaining passengers boarded, Talia allowed herself a moment of tactical assessment. The security checkpoint incident had been an unexpected complication, but ultimately a manageable one. The tattoo in Corvus's ear had functioned exactly as intended, an identifier of last resort that would be recognized by those with the proper clearance, ensuring their passage when standard cover protocols were insufficient. Their mission would begin the moment they landed, extracting an intelligence asset whose information could prevent an imminent attack. Their cover as ordinary travelers was essential. Military uniforms would have made them targets the moment they stepped off the plane in a region where American military presence was politically sensitive. The aircraft door closed with a heavy thunk and the captain announced their imminent departure. Talia felt the subtle shift in the cabin atmosphere as they prepared to leave American soil. Once airborne, there would be no turning back. The mission clock had already started. As the aircraft prepared for departure, Talia reached into her bag and removed a small photograph, weathered at the edges from handling. It showed a family, father, mother, 2 young children standing in front of a modest home. Their faces were unknown to her personally, but their safety depended on the success of this mission. Intelligence had confirmed that the information her team sought could prevent an attack that would claim dozens of similar families as collateral damage. She studied the image briefly before tucking it back into a hidden compartment in her bag. Corvus shifted slightly at her feet, his ears adjusting to the changing pressure as the aircraft began to taxi. Even in this confined space, his training kept him vigilant, his senses attuned to potential threats in ways human operators could never match. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the air, banking gently as it established its course. Talia closed her eyes briefly, not out of fear, but to center herself. The transition to mission status was always a moment that required mental recalibration. Moving from the defensive posture of maintaining cover to the proactive mindset required for operational success. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed the man from Seat 14C making his way toward the lavatory, passing her row with casual indifference. As he did, he dropped a folded napkin that landed by her foot. The move was executed with such natural clumsiness that even Talia, knowing to expect it, admired the subtlety. She waited 30 seconds before retrieving it, using the motion of adjusting Corvus's position as cover. The napkin contained no writing, only a small mark in the corner, confirmation that their extract was still in place, and the landing zone remained secure. Good news, but intelligence in volatile regions could change hourly. The flight attendants began their service routine, moving methodically through the cabin with drinks and snacks. Talia accepted a water, maintaining the behaviors of a normal passenger while her mind worked through contingency plans. Corvus remained motionless at her feet, conserving energy for when it would be needed. 6 hours into the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight portion of their journey, Talia allowed herself a brief period of controlled rest. True sleep was rarely possible on operations, but the techniques she had mastered during training allowed her to achieve restorative rest while maintaining situational awareness. Corvus would alert to any significant change in their environment. She adjusted her position slightly, glancing down at Corvus at the ear bearing the tattoo that had transformed them from suspected rule breakers to respected operators in an instant. The marking represented years of training, sacrifice, and missions that would never appear in any public record. K-93 RDSFG, K-9 Unit, 3rd Special Forces Group. The additional markers identified him specifically as a multi-role asset trained for detection, protection, and combat assistance. Only a handful of dogs achieved such certification, and fewer still maintained operational status for as long as Corvus had. Their partnership had begun 4 years earlier when Talia had been assigned to the Special Operations K-9 training facility at Fort Bragg. Corvus had already washed out 2 potential handlers, not for lack of ability, but because his intelligence and drive required a partner whose skills matched his own. From their first training session, the connection had been immediate and profound. Where other handlers struggled to anticipate Corvus's responses, Talia found she could read his subtle signals as clearly as verbal communication. They had deployed together 6 times to locations that officially never saw American boots on the ground. Their extraction record was flawless. 17 high-value assets removed from hostile territory without casualty or compromise. The tattoo in Corvus's ear had saved their mission twice before. Once at a checkpoint in Eastern Europe and once when local authorities had detained them briefly near the Turkish border. The flight attendant passed by again, noting with approval that Corvus remained perfectly positioned beneath the seat, unlike many service animals that gradually encroached into the aisle during long flights. "Your dog is exceptionally well behaved," she whispered, careful not to disturb nearby sleeping passengers. "Thank you," Talia replied simply. "He is good at his job." The attendant moved on, unaware of how profound an understatement that was. Corvus was not merely well behaved. He was a weapon system, a sensor platform, and a tactical asset with capabilities that exceeded much of the technology deployed alongside special operations teams. His ability to detect explosives surpassed most mechanical sensors, and his capacity to identify and neutralize threats had saved Talia's life on multiple occasions. As the flight continued through the night, crossing time zones and international boundaries, Talia maintained her awareness of the cabin environment. 2 air marshals were aboard, one in first class, one toward the rear of economy. Standard procedure for this route, not related to her mission. The man in 14C had returned to his seat and appeared to be sleeping, though noted the controlled rhythm of his breathing that suggested the same type of alert rest she practiced. They were 5 hours from landing when Talia felt Corvus stir. His movement was subtle, imperceptible to anyone not attuned to his signals, but to her it communicated clear information. Something had changed in the aircraft environment. She maintained her position, eyes closed, breathing steady while extending her awareness to identify what Corvus had sensed. 3 rows ahead, a passenger had been making repeated trips to the lavatory. normal enough on a long flight, except that each time he returned, he sat in a slightly different position, gradually adjusting to face backward toward Talia's row. His movement suggested surveillance rather than physical discomfort. Talia opened her eyes a sliver, enough to observe without being obvious. The man was approximately 40, wearing business casual clothing that matched his cover as a technology consultant, according to the conversation she had overheard during boarding. His watch, however, was military grade, and the calluses on his hands told a different story than keyboard work. She sent a subtle signal to Corvus with her foot, a light pressure that communicated awareness of potential threat. His body tensed almost imperceptibly, ready to move from rest to action instantly if required. The training they had undergone together allowed for complex communication through minimal signals, a critical capability in environments where verbal commands would compromise their position. The man made another trip to the lavatory, and this time when he returned, he paused briefly near Talia's row, ostensibly adjusting something in the overhead bin. His gaze swept over her and Corvus with practiced casualness. Talia maintained her cover, showing no reaction, but her mind was already calculating possibilities. Counter-surveillance was always a risk on operations, particularly when crossing international boundaries. The question was whether this was routine, someone who had flagged her transit through standard intelligence channels, or specific to her mission, which would indicate a security leak. She would proceed under the assumption of the latter, the more dangerous scenario. Better to employ excessive caution than risk compromise. She adjusted her mental mission plan, adding a surveillance detection route after landing before proceeding to the extraction point. The flight attendants announced their approach to landing, beginning their final cabin checks. The man who had been watching Talia returned to his seat and remained there, his interest apparently satisfied for now. Talia made a mental note of his features and movements, information to be included in her post-mission debrief. As the aircraft descended toward their destination, Talia felt the familiar shift in her operational mindset. The mission was now imminent. All the planning, preparation, and transit were prologue to the critical phase that would begin the moment they stepped off the plane. Corvus sensed the change in her focus, his own body language adjusting to match her heightened readiness. The landing was smooth, the aircraft touching down and taxiing to its gate with standard efficiency. Passengers began the usual process of gathering belongings and preparing to disembark, creating the controlled chaos that Talia had used to cover extractions in the past. She remained seated, allowing the aisle to clear slightly before standing. Corvus moved into position beside her, his alertness masked by the appearance of a well-trained service animal responding to his handler. As they moved toward the exit, Talia noted that the man in 14C had already departed, positioning himself as advanced security for the next phase. The suspicious passenger was still gathering his belongings, his timing suggesting he intended to follow her through customs. She had anticipated such surveillance and had prepared countermeasures. The jetway was crowded with deplaning passengers, creating ideal conditions for losing a tail. Talia adjusted her pace to match a family with small children, allowing their natural disruption to the flow of foot traffic to obscure her movements. Corvus stayed perfectly with her, navigating the crowded space with practiced ease. In the terminal, Talia implemented the first phase of her surveillance detection route. Rather than proceeding directly to customs, she diverted to a women's restroom, entering a stall with Corvus and waiting 90 seconds, long enough for any tail to either commit to waiting or to move on to establish a forward position. When she emerged, she took a deliberately wrong turn, heading away from customs toward airline offices before correcting her course. These movements would force any surveillance to either reveal themselves through obvious course corrections or lose track of her temporarily. The International Arrivals Hall was crowded with travelers from multiple flights, providing both cover and complexity. Talia moved through the space with purposeful confidence, neither hurrying nor doling, just another passenger eager to clear customs and begin her visit. Corvus maintained his position, his presence drawing occasional glances, but no particular attention in a facility accustomed to service animals. At customs, Talia presented her passport, a legitimate document with her real name, but a cover occupation and purpose for travel. The officer examined it briefly, comparing her face to the photograph. Business or pleasure? he asked, the standard question for all arrivals. Business, Thalia replied. I am here for a conference on agricultural development. The officer nodded, stamping her passport without further questions. Her documentation had been prepared by specialists who understood exactly what level of detail would satisfy cursory examination without inviting deeper scrutiny. As they proceeded through the final checkpoint, Thalia spotted her surveillance. The man from the aircraft was positioned near the currency exchange, pretending to review rates while watching the flow of exiting passengers. His position confirmed her suspicion. This was not coincidental interest, but targeted surveillance. Thalia made a subtle hand signal to Corvus, a movement that would appear to casual observers as a simple adjustment of his lead, but communicated specific information. They would implement Counter-Surveillance Protocol 3, a series of movements designed to determine whether they faced a single tail or a team. Exiting the airport into the humid air of their destination, Thalia hailed a taxi, giving the name of her cover hotel. As the vehicle pulled away, she watched through the rear window. The man from the aircraft was now on his phone, likely communicating her movements to others. A team operation, then the mission had just become significantly more complex. In the privacy of the taxi, Thalia reached down to Corvus, her fingers gently touching the ear with the tattooed identification. They were no longer in an environment where that mark would provide safe passage. Here, it would mark them as targets if discovered. Yet, the training and partnership it represented would be their greatest asset in completing the mission and returning home safely. The taxi moved through unfamiliar streets toward the city center. Thalia watched the passing landscape, mentally mapping key features and potential extraction routes. Beside her, Corvus remained alert, his senses providing security data that no technology could match. Together, they had overcome worse odds than those they now faced. The mission clock was running. Somewhere in this city, an asset waited for extraction, holding intelligence that could save countless lives. Thalia, Valero, and Corvus, their partnership forged in training and proven in combat, were now the only hope for bringing that intelligence.